Chapter 2: Abuses by the Armed Forces of the Police. Militarization continues after martial law. Since the imposition of martial law in 1972, the armed forces of the Philippines have grown from 60,000 to an estimated strength of 250,000 to 300,000 men. Military and security forces have become powerful institutions within the Philippine society. The growing role of military forces in Philippine society is commonly referred to as militarization. Mindanao, the bleeding land. Although militarization and abuses of human rights by military are prevalent in many areas, they are particularly pervasive in southern island in Mindanao. An estimated 60% of the armed force of the Philippines are concentrated in Mindanao, although the population is less than 1/4 of the total population of the country. The Bleeding Land has been taken from publication of the title by the task force detainees. Salvaging massacres, disappearance, and burnings. Salvaging is a term used in the Philippines to refer to summary execution or extrajudicial surreptitious killing of individual by the armed forces. The person salvaged disappears after being picked up by the military or security forces is found dead some days. The above 4 incidents of salvaging and massacres are only a small sample of many similar cases reported to us and confirmed by us in interviews with witnesses and by written documentation. We also received reports of burnings of hamlets by military personnel in Mindanao and Luzon following activities of the NPA in the vicinity. The arbitrary arrest and torture. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights provides that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest. In addition to inhuman condition of detention, we heard evidence of the widespread torture by military and security forces and received signed affidavits attesting to torture. Hamletting is the herding of rural residents in special camps by military or civilian authorities. Hamletting as a strategy could even alienate the people from the government. The task force's detainees reported in March 1984 that 4 children died in hamlet in Central Zamboanga del Norte. Set up as recently November 1983, hamletting is not a new phenomenon nor unique to the Philippines.
Criminal law and procedure. There's a lot of changes happened in criminal law after martial law in terms of rebellion, insurrection, and sedition. Another striking change in the penalties provided in the Penal Code by Presidential Decree No. 1834, which appears in Chapter 3, Illegal Assemblies and Associations. A lot of changes happened after the Presidential Decree No. 1834 of 1981, especially in terms of penalties. The opposition leaders, when they organize a meeting for propaganda purposes against the government, risk a life sentence or even the death penalty. Anti-subversion legislation. Section 4 provided the following penalties for acts committed after the approval of the Anti-Subversion Act. For the members, arresto mayor for first offense, prisión correccional for second offense, and prisión mayor for further offenses. And for officer or ranking leader or armed member, prisión mayor to death. Rumor mongering. Presidential Decree No. 90 of January 6, 1973, declaring unlawful rumor mongering and spreading false information. The decree is a typical martial law period product, but it is still on the statute book. Criminal procedure. There's a lot of changes happened in criminal procedure, especially in arrest. It is well known that torture frequently occurs when police are allowed to hold suspects for a long period of time without judicial control. Based on the numerous complaints about police brutality and torture in the Philippines, Presidential Decree No. 1404 must be regarded as a particularly unfortunate deviation from the traditional Philippine law. In terms of bail, Section 18, ill persons except those charged with capital offenses when evidence of guilt is strong shall before conviction be bailable by sufficient sureties. Excessive bail shall not be required. As before, anyone suspected of insurrection or rebellion or related crimes is denied the protection of the writ. The government has only to say that it suspects a person of such crime for the writ to be denied. This means that no person in detention can be sure of enjoying his constitutional rights to habeas corpus. This means that the arrest is now possible under an order of the President of the Philippines rather than a judicial warrant. In practice, it seems that the police and military arrest on their own initiative and obtain the preventive detention action from the President afterwards. In conclusion, this examination of the state of criminal law and criminal procedure in the post-martial law period demonstrates that the executive, by virtue of its almost unlimited legislative powers, has created a set of legal instruments which allows the detention not only of those engaged in rebellion or insurrection, but also of vocal opponents of the government without the safeguards of judicial control, or subjects them to the judicial process in order to impose absolutely draconian penalties. This is the legal framework of the post-martial law period, which is clearly designated to uphold the one-man rule and suppress not only rebellion, but also vocal opposition.
Chapter 4: Independence of the Judiciary and Bar. The Judiciary. The 1977 ICJ report found that the government has severely undermined the independence of the judiciary in that it has demanded and received the written resignations of all lower court judges, and it has taken the power to remove all the Supreme Court judges by appointing their successors. The report recommended that the independence of the judiciary should be restored and the letters of resignation, which had been demanded by the President, should be returned to the judges. It was also recommended that the Constitution be amended to guarantee the life appointment of justices of the Supreme Court. While the present writers do not consider that life appointment is essential, we do emphasize that security of tenure until retirement age is essential, as is every aspect of security of office and guarantees of independence of the judges. The bar. As in other countries, lawyers have an important role to play in sustaining and defending the independence of the judiciary and in upholding the rule of law, while great support can be gained from other sectors, especially the church. It is clear that members of the legal profession from the president down hold a position of great influence and power. The Integrated Bar of the Philippines, or IBP, is a body created by the Supreme Court under its constitutional power in 1972. It is compulsory for a lawyer to belong to the IBP, and we are told there are some 32,000 members comprising the judiciary, the practicing bar, and lawyers in other employment. Before 1972, there were voluntary bar associations, the oldest being the Philippine Bar Associations. Voluntary associations continue and include the Philippines Bar Association, National Bar Association of the Philippines, Philippine Lawyer Association, Association of Trial Lawyers of the Philippines, United Philippine Women Lawyers Association, and others. We had the opportunity to speak with members of several of them.
Chapter 5: Economic and Social Rights. The Philippines is present in a serious economic crisis during martial law that was caused primarily by a political factor, and many citizens lost their job. Businessmen and middle class joined with the poor in a public demonstration to discharge Marcos, and it shows many businesses of them got losses, like five-star hotel, and many industries found it difficult to repay construction loan. 80% of population of the Philippines live in poverty because of corruption and inefficiency abandoned in the government bureaucracy. They cause enormous debt of $23.9 billion in other countries. Because of economic crisis, Marcos has obligation as regard trade union right and land reform. Trade union right. The trade union right is also called labor union. This is the right of every worker of an industry or company right to secure improvement in pay, benefit, and working conditions The right essential to safeguard freedom of association for the worker. And last, land reform. Shortly after martial law was declared in 1972, President Marcos announced the land reform. Land reform is a change in a system of land ownership, and this is the right that we need of every farmer in our country, because the Philippines was primarily in agriculture economy. The government distributed 1.8 hectare to tenant farmer and entitled to own 3 hectare of irrigated land or 5 hectare of unirrigated land. The land reform program is covered the rice and corn to raise our crop to export it in other countries. That means this strategy brings to benefit the economy and social modernization.
Widespread abuses of human rights by military and security forces, including extrajudicial killing, massacre, arbitrary arrest, and torture, are prevalent throughout rural areas, but are especially pervasive in Mindanao, where armed insurgency is occurring. The victims of the illegal killings by the armed forces are not only suspected rebels. Massacres of groups of civilians are increasingly reported in rural areas. Torture is common practice of Philippine security and intelligence forces. Evidence of torture is found on the bodies of victims of salvaging. The militarization of Philippine society is continuing despite the lifting of martial law in 1981. The number of men under arms has increased by manifold over pre-martial law figures, and the military budget has grown dramatically. Military officer often abuses civilians and use their force to bring terror to the community. Marcos continues to show dictatorship and punish all people that oppose his decision. Penalties like life and death sentence can be imposed not only by armed insurrection or rebellion, but even on non-violent opposition to the government. Judges failed to serve their duty to bring justice to people. Many of them filed a resignation letter which laid judiciary at the armed forces' hand. The Philippines is in a serious economic crisis. Its external debt is huge. Government spend a lot on prestige project that leads to corruption. The health of the Filipinos are also affected. Malnutrition is widespread. Diseases that are curable take many lives, and facilities are unavailable. And the lands of the ethnic tribes are threatened by the exploitation of resources and lands by the Philippines and foreign enterprises. In order to ensure a return to democratic government and protection of human rights of its citizens, the Philippine government is respectfully urged to consider at an early date the following measure: the repeal of Amendment Number 6, the abolition of preventive detention action and any form of administrative detention beyond judicial control, restoration of the privilege of habeas corpus, separation of military and police, giving the civilian court jurisdiction to try members of the armed forces and police for offenses committed against civilians, ending arrest and harassment of militant labor leaders solely by reason of legitimate trade unions activities, the raising of salaries of judges to a level which would permit them to live in the manner expected of them, the guarantee of security of tenure for members of judiciary on a good behavior, the return to democratic government, and the repeal of constitutional provision or decrees permitting executive interference with security of tenure of judges.